I felt the tremor of their old judgments before I even saw their faces, a cold phantom limb sensation radiating from the expensive leather chairs they now occupied. Then I saw them, the architects of my past humiliations, now pale, nervous shadows trapped in my room. I am Lily. And this was my table, my rules, my kingdom forged from the ashes of their indifference. The holiday season always felt like a cruel joke to me. Our family's sprawling suburban home, normally quiet, transformed into a dazzling spectacle of lights and laughter. Every window sparkled with fairy lights, every mantelpiece draped in garland. A towering Christmas tree in the living room, adorned with hundreds of ornaments collected over generations, shimmered under the soft glow of 1,000 tiny bulbs. Presents, wrapped in shiny paper and tied with elaborate bows, piled high beneath its boughs. For everyone else, it was magic. For me, Lily, it was a spotlight on my own invisibility. I was 9 years old that Christmas, a small girl with light brown curly hair that always seemed to escape its braids, and eyes that were supposed to be green, but often looked red-rimmed from holding back tears. Freckles dusted my nose, tiny constellations my grandpa would sometimes call angel kisses, though no one else in the room ever seemed to notice them. My clothes were always hand-me-downs, usually a slightly oversized gray hoodie that swallowed me whole, its fabric softened from countless washes, and faded jeans patched at the knees. While my cousins buzzed around, their new Christmas outfits pristine and bright, I retreated into my chosen corner of the living room. It was behind the enormous velvet armchair, a spot the glittering Christmas lights barely reached, a sliver of shadow amidst the blinding, overwhelming cheer. No one sat there. No presents were ever placed near it. It was my only sanctuary, a silent fortress where I felt less like an uninvited guest, less like a ghost in my own family's celebration. My cousin Sarah, a year older than me, had that perfect, sleek blonde hair and an air of detached superiority. She spent most of the evening glued to her brand-new tablet, occasionally glancing up to offer a dismissive when someone spoke to her. She never spoke to me directly, not unless it was to complain. Her parents, Aunt Carol and Uncle David, simply indulged her, smiling at her aloofness as if it were a sign of sophistication. Then there was Uncle John. He was my father's older brother, a man whose booming laughter usually meant someone else was the uncomfortable punchline. He'd bellow across the room, his eyes scanning for agreement, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. Shouldn't you be playing outside? He made it sound like my quiet introspection, my love for learning, was a flaw, something to be corrected. His words, delivered with a hearty chuckle, always cut deeper than any shout. And Cousin Tom. Tom was the golden boy, everyone's darling. Blonde, athletic, and utterly charming, when adults were within earshot, he was 2 years older than me. His greatest joy seemed to be making my life subtly miserable. He'd accidentally trip me in the hallway, sending my books scattering, or brazenly swipe a cookie right from my hand, then flash that innocent cherubic grin when Grandma Martha glanced over. "Tom, you're such a good boy, always sharing," she'd coo, completely oblivious to his devious streak, to the glint of malice in his eyes as he'd take another bite of my stolen treat. He was the perpetual center of attention, showered with effusive praise for every mediocre achievement, while my quiet accomplishments went entirely unnoticed, unremarked upon. Christmas morning was the annual parade of their favoritism. Tom would rip open boxes containing the latest gaming console, a high-tech drone, or brand-new sports equipment. Sarah would unwrap designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and the newest smartphone. My own gifts? They were always singular, always practical, and always a stark contrast. It was a lovely story, yes, but it was clearly secondhand, its pages yellowed and corners dog-eared, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten bookshelves. "It's a classic, Lily," Aunt Carol said, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright, a clear indication she was trying to convince herself more than me. She didn't look at me, her gaze already drifting towards Tom's ecstatic face as he discovered a brand-new remote control car, still in its pristine box. My cousin Emma, 3 years younger than me, unwrapped a sparkling pink bicycle with ribbons and streamers, gleaming under the tree lights. I just held my book, tracing the faded illustration on its cover, the paper feeling thin and fragile, a tangible symbol of my status. My mind, however, was a world away from those hand-me-down books and the petty taunts. I devoured everything I could get my hands on: history, science, art, philosophy. I would spend hours sketching intricate designs, imagining complex machines or fantastical creatures, filling entire sketchbooks with my ideas. One quiet afternoon, during a family gathering, I showed Uncle John a drawing I had spent weeks on. It was a detailed cross-section of a proposed wind turbine, complete with annotations explaining the mechanics and energy output. I was so proud of it, so eager to share my insight. He took one look, chuckled dismissively, and handed it back without a word. "That's interesting, Lily," he said, his eyes already glazing over, then immediately turned to Tom to ask about his latest soccer game, which had been, by all accounts, quite dull. My cousin Sarah, catching a glimpse of my drawing, scoffed. "Trying to be an engineer, Lily?" The wave of laughter that followed, a tide of adult voices, washed over me, drowning my excitement, extinguishing my small spark of hope like a doused candle. Another time, I tried to explain a simple scientific concept I'd learned from an old encyclopedia, the principles of flight. I used a carefully folded paper airplane, trying to articulate the lift and drag forces in simple terms. My cousin Tom, restless and bored, just snatched the plane from my hands, folded it into a crude, unrecognizable bird, and flung it across the room, hitting the ceiling fan. "See, Lily? It flies." Everyone laughed again, a hearty, indulgent sound. My grandmother, Grandma Martha, just patted my head absently, her attention already elsewhere. "Such a thoughtful child," she'd murmur, but her eyes were already on Tom, who was now expertly kicking a deflated football around the living room, narrowly missing an antique vase. It was always like that. My intellect, my curiosity, my desperate efforts to connect through ideas, they were consistently met with either disinterest, outright mockery, or a vague, almost condescending kindness that felt worse, somehow, than outright rejection. It was a clear message. My mind, my passion did not matter. The numbers, when I look back now, paint a chillingly clear picture of their systematic neglect. My report cards were a consistent string of perfect A's year after year in every single subject. I devoured advanced textbooks for fun, constantly seeking out more knowledge. Tom, on the other hand, barely scraped by with C's and D's in math and science, yet his parents proudly displayed every single participation trophy he ever earned on a dedicated shelf in their living room. My academic achievements were met with a perfunctory, "Good for you, Lily," a quick nod, before the conversation inevitably shifted to Tom's latest sporting endeavor, however insignificant. Uncle John would declare, beaming with pride. Meanwhile, my straight-A report cards, filled with glowing comments from my teachers, would disappear into a forgotten junk drawer, never to be seen again, as if their existence were an inconvenient truth. College funds? They were a constant loud topic of conversation for Tom and Sarah. My grandparents had set up robust savings accounts for them since birth, discussing prestigious universities, Ivy League dreams, and lucrative careers with an almost religious fervor. For me, crickets. Absolute deafening silence. I once overheard my Uncle John telling my Aunt Carol in a hushed tone, "Lily will probably do fine with a scholarship." A scholarship they never once encouraged me to apply for, never helped me prepare for, never even acknowledged as a serious, viable path. My future was an afterthought, an item on a distant checklist, a problem for someone else to solve, preferably without their involvement. The opportunities they readily offered to my cousins, expensive summer camps, private tutoring, new musical instruments, educational trips abroad, were never extended to me. I was always left behind, always watching from the sidelines, always excluded from their vision of success and happiness. My name was never even mentioned in those hushed, hopeful discussions about futures. Every year, the pattern repeated, etched deeper and deeper into my young mind. I had thought, if I just tried harder, if I just proved my worth, they would see. They would have to. But it turned out their indifference wasn't random. It was the beginning of a much larger plan. By the time I turned 16, the patterns of neglect had solidified into something crueler, more intentional. It felt like their indifference was no longer a random oversight, but a carefully orchestrated plan, slowly unfolding to push me out. They just hadn't announced the final stage yet. Still, I refused to give up. My mind, always my sanctuary, buzzed with an urgent energy. I had spent months, maybe even a year, meticulously planning my escape, my declaration of independence. It wasn't just a fleeting dream. It was a carefully constructed blueprint for my future. I envisioned a small online platform, a niche market for handcrafted, unique greeting cards. I'd design them myself, drawing on my artistic skills, and I'd handle the logistics, the marketing, everything. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about earning my own way, proving I could stand on my own 2 feet, maybe even contributing a little to my own future, especially my college education, which they so conveniently ignored. I polished my presentation, created mock-up designs, even crunched some numbers I'd secretly researched. My heart hammered with a desperate hope. This was it. My chance to show them I was more than just the quiet girl with the second-hand book. I gathered everyone in the living room after Christmas dinner. The tree still sparkled, its colored lights blinking merrily, but the warmth felt artificial, just for them. I laid out my vision, my voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as I spoke of my passion, my plans. Uncle John was the first to scoff. "Handmade cards, Lily? In this day and age?" Aunt Carol chimed in, "Darling, it's a sweet hobby, but a business? You don't have a head for business." The word practical hung in the air like an accusation. Cousin Sarah burst out laughing. "You think anyone would buy your drawings? They're so quaint. Maybe try selling lemonade, Lily." Her laughter was sharp, a dagger to my carefully constructed confidence. Tom, ever the golden boy, just shrugged. "She'll get bored in a week." My stomach twisted into knots. Their faces, usually so quick to beam at Tom's mediocre sports achievements, were now masks of dismissive amusement, condescending pity. My grandmother Martha, usually the softer one, surprised me the most. She sighed, her eyes filled with a weariness that felt pointedly directed at me. "Lily, we've discussed this. We've done enough." Then Uncle John, stepping forward, his voice losing its jovial tone, becoming cold and firm. "Look, Lily, we've talked it over as a family. You're 16 now. We're not going to fund these fanciful ideas," Aunt Carol added, her voice crisp. "You're a bright girl," Grandma Martha said, but it felt hollow, a caveat before the axe fell. The words hit me like physical blows. That was the phrase. They didn't say it aloud, not exactly, but their eyes, their collective stance, their icy pronouncements made it clear. I was officially off the list. A stray, an outsider, despite being under their roof. The next few days were a blur of hushed conversations and pointed silences. Then came the knock on my door the day before Christmas Eve. It was Uncle John. His expression was grim, devoid of any festive cheer. "Lily," he said, not meeting my eyes, "we've found you a place." A small room in a boarding house across town. New Year's Day. My world imploded. I had nowhere else to go. My small pile of belongings, my worn books, my sketchbooks, a few clothes, felt suddenly too heavy to carry. I packed in silence, the festive lights outside the window, mocking my internal darkness. Every discarded toy, every framed family photo in the hallway, seemed to taunt me with the life I was now being expelled from. That night, the day before I was due to leave, I stood by my window. The snow fell softly, blanketing the suburban streets in pristine white. Their house, brightly lit, glowed like a beacon of warmth and togetherness, a fortress I was being cast out of. I was alone, truly alone, at 16. The despair was a crushing weight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. I felt utterly broken, unwanted, a discarded orphan in a world that had no place for me. But then a flicker, a tiny spark in the vast icy emptiness. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something darker, fiercer. A burning ember of resentment, of righteous fury. They thought they could break me. They thought they could erase me. They thought I would just disappear, quietly accept my fate. A cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving them wrong, about making them see what they had thrown away. They thought I would crumble, that I would shatter into 1,000 pieces and never recover. But that frigid night, as I gazed back at the house blazing with Christmas lights, a home I was no longer a part of, I made myself a solemn vow. One day I would make them pay for every dismissive word, every cold shoulder, every single act of betrayal. I was 16 when they finally officially wrote me off. My Aunt Carol and Uncle John sat me down, their faces carefully neutral, almost practiced in their indifference. They handed me a small backpack with a few changes of clothes, a crumpled $20 bill, and an address for a youth shelter across town. No goodbyes, no hug, not even a backward glance as I walked out their door into the chilling autumn air. The house, usually so loud, fell silent behind me. My education became the streets, the libraries, and the internet cafes where I could afford an hour of access. I took any odd job I could find. Washing dishes in greasy diners, stocking shelves in all-night convenience stores, delivering newspapers before dawn. My hands were always chapped, my feet always aching, but my mind, that was where I truly lived. I devoured every free online course, every discarded textbook, every documentary I could stream. My hunger for knowledge wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was my armor, my only hope. I slept in shelters, on friends' couches, sometimes even in empty park benches under a thin blanket, but I never stopped learning. The family, meanwhile, continued their lavish lives. I would see glimpses of them on local news, at charity galas, their smiles wide and confident. They were Donovan Enterprises, a name synonymous with success, with community pillars. But something always gnawed at me. My parents, Robert and Maria, had always been quiet, honest people. My Uncle John and Aunt Carol always made sure to mention it, subtly, whenever my inheritance, or lack thereof, came up. "Your parents made some poor choices, Lily," Aunt Carol would say, a sympathetic frown on her face that never quite reached her eyes. Years later, I was working as a junior clerk for a small law firm, mostly filing and organizing dusty old boxes of documents. One sweltering summer afternoon, I stumbled upon an archive related to an old property dispute, a case involving Donovan Enterprises from decades ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled out the boxes, blowing dust from faded labels. And then I saw it. A series of internal memos, ledger entries, and signed agreements. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't just old records. They were a meticulously crafted paper trail, revealing years of shell companies, inflated invoices, and outright embezzlement. Donovan Enterprises, run by my Uncle John and Aunt Carol, along with my other aunts and uncles, had systematically siphoned millions from the company's legitimate earnings, hiding it in offshore accounts. But the most horrifying part, the twist that sent a cold shock through my entire body, was who they had framed. They had orchestrated a scheme to pin the initial largest financial discrepancy, a shortfall of nearly $5 million, on my parents, Robert and Maria, my quiet, hard-working parents who had trusted their own family, who had believed in their partners. The documents showed they had manipulated contracts my father had signed, forged my mother's initials on loan applications, and then, after their untimely accident, used their deaths as a convenient cover-up. The financial strain of their bad investments led to their recklessness. They'd subtly spread the rumor. My parents weren't just victims of an accident. They were victims of a ruthless family conspiracy. It wasn't just indifference. It wasn't just a lack of love. Their dismissal of me, their constant undermining, their refusal to support my education or future, it was all part of a grander, uglier design. They needed to discredit my parents to protect their own crimes. And I, Lily, the quiet, observant child who loved to read and ask questions, I was a loose end. I was a potential threat, a living reminder of the people they had destroyed. They had to ensure I remained poor, uneducated, and powerless, forever dependent, forever dismissed. They needed me out of the way, far from anything that might expose their truth. I sat there in that dimly lit back room of the law firm, surrounded by crumbling files and the ghosts of forgotten cases. The late afternoon sun barely pierced the grimy window, casting long, dusty shadows. I held the damning documents in my trembling hands, my eyes burning. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from a rage so pure, so absolute, it felt like ice in my veins. My parents' good name, their very legacy, had been meticulously destroyed by the people who called themselves family. Their reason for writing me off wasn't simply that I was an inconvenience. It was a calculated, cruel move to ensure their ongoing deception remained hidden. Now I understand. I was not just a burden, I was a threat. And that threat I will turn into my most powerful weapon. My hands still trembled holding those damning papers. But the fear, the despair, it was gone, replaced by a cold, steady fire in my gut. I was no longer a victim. I was a weapon in the making. I sought out mentors, not in fancy boardrooms, but in the quiet corners of the internet, in late-night forums, and in the wisdom of forgotten books. I found an old, eccentric data analyst, Mr. Harrison, who saw past my patched-up clothes and saw a mind hungry for patterns. He taught me the dark art of digital forensics, how to trace invisible threads of money and power. I met Sarah, a brilliant, cynical lawyer who had seen too much corporate greed. She offered me not charity, but a chance, an internship where I learned not just the law, but its loopholes, its vulnerabilities. My business started small. I offered specialized data recovery and forensic auditing services, often to small businesses struggling against bigger, more ruthless competitors. I worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a burning ambition. My reputation grew, whispered among those who needed truth unearthed. Lily's Solutions, they called my company. It became a beacon for the wronged, a force that could unmask the hidden. With every successful case, with every new client, I built not just wealth, but an arsenal. I expanded my team, hiring ethical hackers, seasoned private investigators, and legal minds as sharp as my own. While they focused on our clients, I carved out time, always, for my personal project. The Donovan case, my case. I delved deeper, using my newfound skills and resources. The internal memos I first found were just the tip of a sprawling iceberg. I uncovered shell companies registered in forgotten island nations, intricate webs of false invoices, and a network of complicit officials they had cultivated over decades. Uncle John and Aunt Carol had built a fortress of lies meticulously maintained. But I had the key. I built a dossier, a towering stack of undeniable proof. Bank statements, encrypted emails, recorded phone calls, sworn affidavits from former employees they had threatened into silence. I learned their habits, their weaknesses, their fears. I understood their every move, from the calculated cruelty to their carefully constructed public personas. I even found evidence of how they manipulated my parents' accident to look more plausible, closing the net around them from every angle. My office wall became my battlefield map. It was covered in flowcharts, timelines, and photographs. Each photo, a smiling face from my childhood, now represented a target. Uncle John, Aunt Carol, Cousin Mark, Aunt Susan. I drew a red line through each of their names, one by one, as their involvement was definitively proven, as my plan for their downfall solidified. I ensured every legal avenue was explored, every psychological lever understood. There would be no escape, no plea bargain, no sympathetic judge. My preparations were complete. The silence in my office was deafening, the only sound the faint hum of my computer. I looked at the wall, at the crossed-out names, at the intricate web of evidence leading straight to their downfall. A ghost of a smile touched my lips. The day had finally arrived. The old debt, the one they thought forgotten, I would demand every single penny, with interest. and they, those who had so carelessly cast Lily aside, would kneel. They would beg for a mercy they never showed me. My vengeance was a dish best served cold, and it was now perfectly chilled. The conference room gleamed, sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the festive warmth of the Donovan Christmas gatherings I remembered. This was not a family dinner. This was a reckoning. My family, the revered Donovan Enterprises, sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces etched with a fear I had never seen on them before. Uncle John, Aunt Carol, and the rest of my aunts and uncles, their usual air of self-importance evaporated, replaced by a desperate, palpable dread. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling, and I, Lily, the forgotten girl, was holding the hammer. Donovan Enterprises faces imminent collapse, I stated, my voice calm, almost detached, yet every word was a sharpened blade. I looked at their stunned faces, the panic rising in their eyes. Years of illicit financial activities, shell companies, and inflated invoices, all meticulously documented. The offshore accounts you so carefully hid? They are no longer secret. The authorities have been made aware. Every single transaction, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer of funds has been compiled, analyzed, and presented. Uncle John's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Aunt Carol, usually so composed, looked like a ghost. I continued, my gaze sweeping across each of them, making sure they knew exactly what I was doing. You framed my parents, Robert and Maria, for a $5 million shortfall. You allowed the world to believe they were reckless, irresponsible, even as you profited from their good name, their hard work, and ultimately, their deaths. I found the original contracts. I found the forged initials. I found the internal memos detailing how you planned to shift the blame, how you celebrated your ingenious solution. Aunt Carol let out a small, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Uncle John slumped in his chair, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost satisfying to witness. The carefully cultivated smiles of my cousins, Tom and Sarah, had vanished, replaced by open-mouthed horror. They began to whisper amongst themselves, a frantic, desperate murmur. Uncle John finally found his voice, a raw, desperate croak. You can't do this. Think of the family. Think of what this will do to all of us. Our legacy, our reputation. He looked at me, a flicker of his old arrogance returning, quickly extinguished by the absolute despair in his eyes. He was begging. You're a Donovan, too. You have to help us. Please, Lily. Forgive us. We made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. You're so smart, so capable. You always were. Just tell us what to do. A bitter, almost triumphant laugh escaped my lips. My voice dripped with the sarcasm I had spent years perfecting. You want me to forgive you? Do you remember 16-year-old Lily? The girl you handed a $20 bill and a bus ticket to a shelter? The one you told was old enough to make her own way, as you discussed Tom's Ivy League applications and Sarah's trust fund? I pushed myself up from my chair, my voice rising, gaining strength with every word. You wanted me out of the way, didn't you? A potential threat, a living reminder of the good, honest people you destroyed. You needed me to be poor, uneducated, powerless. You thought you had succeeded. But every cold night I spent, every discarded book I read, every late-night shift I worked, it was all for this moment. Uncle John's head was in his hands. Aunt Carol was openly weeping. Lily, we're begging you. We'll do anything. Please don't let this ruin us. We'll make it right. I looked at them, truly looked at them, and saw not just their fear, but the echoes of the selfish, heartless individuals who had condemned me, and worse, my parents. Their pleas were not for redemption, but for self-preservation. This wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was about saving their own skin. What I want, I said, my voice cutting through their desperate pleas like ice, is justice. Justice for Robert and Maria. Justice for every single person you cheated, every life you casually ruined. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over them, a suffocating blanket of their own making. I walked to the head of the table, directly in front of Uncle John and Aunt Carol, their eyes fixed on me, wide with a terrible hope. My gaze was unyielding cold. The truth, all of it, will come to light. Every sordid detail, every lie, every betrayal. There will be no covering it up. They looked at me, begging. But what I saw wasn't weakness. It was the people who had heartlessly crushed a child's heart. And this time I wouldn't let them escape easily. The gavel fell with a final echoing thud. Donovan Enterprises, the empire they had so ruthlessly built on the ruins of my parents' good name, was shattered. The headlines screamed about financial fraud, money laundering, and widespread corruption. Uncle John, Aunt Carol, Tom, and Sarah, their names, once synonymous with old money and impeccable standing, were now dragged through the mud of public scandal. The elegant Donovan estate, the very symbol of their power, was seized. Their lavish Christmas parties, their exclusive charity galas, all became distant memories as legal battles consumed their every waking moment, draining them dry. I watched it unfold from a distance, with a detached clarity that surprised even me. Their carefully constructed world crumbled, piece by piece, just as I had promised. There was no recovery for them, no secret escape, no hidden loophole. Every door they tried to open led them deeper into the maze of consequences they had built for themselves. The law, slow but relentless, had finally caught up. And I, Lily, the girl they had tried to erase, was the catalyst. I remembered the cold, the hunger, the shame. I remembered nights curled up in bus stops, pretending the noise was a lullaby. I remembered the burning humiliation of being written off as an inconvenience, a burden. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had silenced me forever. But every hardship they inflicted was a forge, hammering my will into steel. Every insult was fuel to a fire that burned hotter and brighter with each passing year. I was not just a survivor, I was a builder. I built an empire of my own, brick by excruciating brick, from the ashes of their betrayal. People often ask me if I ever forgave them. The truth is, I didn't. Not in the way they begged for, not in a way that absolved them of their sins. What I did was far more potent, far more liberating. I freed myself. I released myself from the chains of their cruelty, the heavy burden of their injustice. My healing wasn't about them finding redemption. It was about me finding peace. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, taking back the power they had stolen. I found my freedom not in forgetting their actions, but in refusing to let them define my future. The bitterness that had once consumed me gave way to a quiet, profound satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you stood up, you fought back, and you won. My story isn't about vengeance, not ultimately. It's about resilience. It's about the unwavering belief that no matter how dark the night, you can always build your own dawn. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't dictated by the people who cast you aside, but by the strength you find within yourself to rise. Don't let anyone convince you that you are anything less than magnificent. Don't let their small-mindedness limit your vast potential. Tonight I sit by my window, the city lights twinkling below, a tapestry of 1,000 small fires. Christmas is in the air, but this time there is no loneliness, no sharp pang of rejection. There is only a deep, quiet contentment. The same twinkling lights that once mocked my solitude now sing a quiet lullaby of peace, a testament to a life rebuilt, a spirit unbroken. If you have ever been written off, discarded, or told you weren't enough, remember this: your story is not over. Stand up. Build your own empire. And never, ever forget that you are worth so much more than they ever thought possible. If my journey resonates with you, I encourage you to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience, and leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Let's remind the world that we are here, we are powerful, and we are just getting started.